Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Matthew Nuriel. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at JIMENA, Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa, and this roundtable is presented in partnership with Stand With Us. We organized this discussion in response to the recent war between Israel and the regime in Iran, as well as the events of October 7th, to highlight a voice that's been largely missing from the conversation: Iranian Jewish university students. At a time when Jewish students are at the forefront of rising anti-Semitism, especially from academia itself, the experiences of Iranian Jews bring a unique and often overlooked perspective. This roundtable is a platform for these students to share their stories, reflect on life before and after October 7th, and speak openly about the challenges they're facing in this moment. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for the panelists on the roundtable for joining us. If first of all, you could each introduce yourselves and tell us what your role is, what organization you're with, or what university you're at, that would be wonderful. We can start with Brooke.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brooke. I'm an incoming junior at UC San Diego, and I'm the co-founder of the Persian community at Hillel that really we got to kickstart because I was an Emerson Fellow at Stand With Us this past year.
Awesome. Brandon, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Brandon Tavakoli. I just graduated the University of Southern California, US, right on this year, and I'm transitioning to Duke Law School in the fall. So when I was at USC, I was president of Children's for Israel for 2 years, which is our bipartisan pro-Israel student organization on campus, and a student government senator for the last 2 years, not only during October 7th, but in the years and the semesters following.
Awesome. Thank you for being with us. Yasmeen, please introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. I'm Yasmeen. I graduated from Tulane University a year ago, where I founded and was the president of the movement to address anti-Semitism starting 8 months before October 7th. And since graduating, I founded a nonprofit called Our Campus United, which fights anti-Semitism on college campuses across the country. And proud to say that we're an affiliate of Stand With Us as well.
Thank you for being here. Abby, please say hello.
Hi, everybody. My name is Abby Yosian. I'm here on behalf of Stand With Us in our high school department. I'm the senior Southern California high school regional manager. So a lot of my work on a daily basis has to do with mentoring and supporting high school students through their journey of activism and Jewish activism. I am a recent graduate of USC, just like Brandon, fight on. And I will also be heading back to grad school this fall. I'll be attending Pepperdine, which is very exciting.
Awesome. Chloe.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Levian. I am a recent UCLA alum where I was president of Bruins for Israel. And for the last 3 years, I've served as the senior Southwest Campus regional manager at Stand With Us. I am also active on social media as that Persian Jew, and I'm starting a new role as the associate director of graduate programs at Stand With Us. But I've been working with a lot of college students, including some of who are on the screen right now, with a lot of issues surrounding anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for being here and for taking the time to be with us. Let's delve right in. So just so everybody's clear and the viewers are clear, I want this to be a discussion between all of you. So that's why we're doing it as a virtual roundtable. So let's get into it. My first question or prompt for you guys is, how has life changed for you as an Iranian Jewish student since October 7th? Brandon, would you like to start?
Well, it's such a big question because I think Jewish students are, after October 7th, have tried to come back to this sense of normalcy, but I don't think any Jewish student, whether they're Iranian or not, can feel like they're heading back to that sense of normalcy. I think we've opened a can of worms that, and we've publicized that. I think a lot of Jewish students who were involved in the movement before October 7th, before it was cool, as I like to say, knew of the underlying anti-Semitism and the pernicious but subtle ways that Jewish students were being ostracized, and anti-Israel sentiment was being normalized on campus. But after October 7th, the entire community, every sector of communities around campus and across the nation saw the pernicious anti-Semitism that was on campus. So for me, as an Iranian Jewish student, and I'm so interested to hear the perspectives of other Iranian Jewish students, there is a mantle after October 7th that we as Iranian Jewish students were taking up, because we understand deep in our bones what a world without Israel means, what a world where anti-Semitism, where Jew hatred is normalized, what that means, because our foundation here in the United States and why we're here is based in that reality. So I think for Jewish students in some, we're in the space of trying to return to normalcy, but I don't think we're going back. And a lot of us have grown through that process of meeting this mantle of responsibility.
So I have a question that comes up that I'd love to get into this discussion. So what was it like prior to October 7th? Like, we know, we've all seen what the effect of October 7th and the aftermath of October 7th has been on Jewish students across the board. But I'm always curious, because there was obviously a buildup to that moment from, within academic spaces themselves. So did you experience any, or a fraction or some form of what we experienced on college campuses after October 7th prior to October 7th? And if so, I'd love to hear all of your perspectives on that and what that was like.
I can speak to this a little bit. I founded the movement to address anti-Semitism at Tulane 8 months before October 7th, and largely in response to the anti-Semitism that we saw. I think the most important thing to note is that it was pretty subtle. There was anti-Semitism in the classroom, and a lot of sort of really aggressive anti-Israel views being pushed on students, this oppressor narrative. And one anecdote that I think speaks to this a little bit is I majored in finance, so never did any sort of Middle East studies or Jewish studies, but I decided to take an elective course called Race and Ethnicity in the Middle East while I was a student, to just learn a little bit more about my Iranian identity and the history of the region. And while I was in the class, the professor gave us a reading. It was only me and one other Jewish student enrolled in the course, and it was a pretty small class to begin with. And the professor gave us a reading that was written by a Columbia professor who had praised a terrorist that bombed a bus full of children during the first Intifada. And I remember looking up this person's name and seeing that, and then thinking, how could this possibly be the anti-bias? How could this possibly be the unbiased source that all of these impressionable students are reading to learn about this conflict? And then in actually reading the piece that was assigned, I realized that there was a very clear goal to demonize Israel and therefore demonize the Jewish people. And it was very unsettling. At the time, I did not have the courage to speak up. There was one other Jewish student in the class, as I mentioned, who did decide to speak up, and he was attacked by the professor. At one point, he was kicked out of the classroom and asked to leave. The professor told him that he was embarrassing him and that it was completely inappropriate to make such accusations of anti-Semitism within the classroom. And I was just thinking to myself, like, is this what taking these courses is like? And upon doing more research, realized that Qatar has invested so much money at Tulane and at countless universities around the country to build up these Middle East studies program. And it was heartbreaking for me to be in a classroom full of students that just had no perspective and sort of felt like they were almost being brainwashed by a professor that clearly had a very anti-Israel and anti-Semitic agenda. And another incident that I can speak to, which sort of made me realize how grave the double standard on these campuses is I don't know if any of you remember when Kanye West went on his first crazy Twitter rampage. I know he's had many of those since then. But I think it was January of 2023. He tweeted that he wanted to go DEFCON 3 on the Jews. And a student by the name of Sarah Ma with a Jewish roommate wrote an article about how Kanye West was right about the Jews, where she praised Hitler, she called for a second Holocaust and equated Jews with Nazis. And it really shook the entire Jewish community at the university. Tulane is one of the most Jewish schools in the country. And we all sort of waited to see how the university would respond. This is a private school with very strict policies around hate speech. And the university didn't really do anything to discipline this student. And eventually she left as a result of social ostracization. But I just remember seeing that and thinking, why does the university refuse to protect us?
So there's a very clear double standard there, right? Has anybody else on this panel experienced anything like this?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got into this work professionally before October 7th because there was an unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism on college campuses. I would always say as a UCLA student that I went to a university that was on the news every week for a different anti-Semitic incident. And obviously we've seen this to a completely different degree post-October 7th, seeing the anti-Semitism at UCLA and at college campuses all around the US and Canada and truly all around the world. I remember there being incidents in the year before October 7th, whether that's during Apartheid Week at UC San Diego, there was a bathroom in one of the dorms that was vandalized with feces, swastikas, and that was before October 7th. Or when there was Apartheid Week at UCLA, or what they called Palestine Liberation Week, there came to Hillel and vandalized Hillel. They had a free speech wall at school where there were swastikas and the word 6 million wasn't enough, and I support a woman's right to abort a 7-year-old Israeli child or Jewish child. I think that the anti-Semitism we're seeing now is not anything new. We've seen pervasive anti-Semitism on college campuses, but now it's to a completely different degree. We've been seeing old trends come back, such as die-ins, but we're seeing new things like over the past 21 months, such as encampments on campus that have made it inescapable for Jewish students. When I was at UCLA, I could have avoided the anti-Semitism. I didn't have to be involved. Now Jewish students don't have the choice. They will see anti-Semitism when they're just studying at the library on campus. And we've also seen, finally, an awareness of anti-Semitism on college campuses. Before October 7th, it wasn't one of the main topics that people are talking about, but now it's inescapable. Everyone is talking about it, rightfully so.
Wow. Somebody who's a bit older than all of you, I knew that this was rife in the world of academia and on college campuses, but to hear these direct stories are just, they're mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. Does anybody else want to share any experiences they've had?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So I, along with Chloe, I actually was never a college student after October 7th. So all I know about, campus life is prior to October 7th. And it's really sad to say, but everything that we started seeing, anti-Semitism we started seeing increase post-October 7th, still very much so existed prior to October 7th. I, like Brandon, was a Jewish student leader within the community at USC. And the summer, I think it was the summer of 2018, the summer of 2022 it was, we had a Jewish student that was elected as vice president of USG, so vice president student body, and she was just doxxed and completely torn apart, ripped to shreds the summer of COVID over her Zionist identity. She was the prior president of Trojans for Israel, and one of the most capable and competent students I've ever met during my time at USC. She would have made a phenomenal vice president of student body. And due to the bullying and the harassment and the doxing that she received because of her Zionist identity, she was forced to step down and I believe even pursued legal action against the school, against USC, because they did not protect her in the way that they should have while she was just receiving this horrendous hate campaign. It made news across Los Angeles. And as a student leader, in response to that, it was really the first time we saw strong anti-Israel sentiment at USC in a very, very long time. At that time, it was typically a very apathetic school. And we restarted with Hillel ILF, which is our Israel Learning Fellowship, because we had so many Jewish students coming to us saying, I want to be able to defend Rose and I want to be able to defend my Zionist identity, but I don't know how. I don't have the tools to do so. So we started that back up. It was a 8-week fellowship where we met once a week for 2 hours to discuss the history of Zionism, the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, anti-Semitism through the ages, how to respond, how to have difficult conversations about Israel. And we really gathered together after that, and we made a positive situation out of a really, really negative situation. But anti-Semitism definitely on campus definitely did not start post October 7th. Yeah. And maybe Brandon could speak a little bit about it as well. He was a student at USC at the same time.
I mean, it's baffling to me the degree to which it was obviously present that all of you are speaking about your experiences, and this was all, in some cases, years before October 7th. So in many ways, October 7th was just kind of like the lid being blown off of something that was already percolating and cooking in there. I have a question that keeps coming into my mind that I'd love to hear you guys discuss amongst yourselves. Or just tell me your experiences with, because we're all Iranian Jews, and I find it really interesting that the Jews in Iran, who, anybody who doesn't know, there's only about 10% remaining of what was there prior to the 1979 revolution. But it's a very interesting situation, and I think it's a situation that's common across the board in a lot of Middle Eastern countries when it comes to Jews, is that being Jewish itself wasn't outlawed, for lack of a better term, right? You weren't persecuted by name for being Jewish. You were persecuted for being a Zionist. Under the Islamic Republic Constitution, Judaism isn't illegal, but Zionism is. So that was the impetus for many of our families, our parents, our grandparents, for leaving Iran after the 79 revolution. And that's why there's only 10% of the population remaining there, of the Jewish population. So I feel like there's parallels to what we're seeing now. Do any of you feel that, or have any of you spoken to your parents about that, or grandparents? I'm curious to hear what your perception or perspective is on that, because it's pretty much the same thing. We saw Jews across the Middle East and North Africa either flee because their lives remained so difficult, or just straight up be expelled, all under the guise of anti-Zionism. Does that resonate with you guys? And again, I'd love to hear if you've had these discussions amongst yourselves or with your families.
I can jump in with that. When I started in college, it was my second week of school was October 7th because of the quarter system. So it was the second week of my freshman year where I was, meeting new people, very tentative friendships were formed. And when October 7th happened, I was just imagining like, oh, this is the age my parents were. I was 18. Like, this is the age my parents were when they moved from Iran to America. But, I'm not going to have a very similar experience. It's very safe to be Jewish. I can just be proud and open about being Jewish and being a Zionist to anyone I meet. And after October 7th, all these people that I was very openly Jewish around, when they figured out that being Jewish meant that I was also a Zionist, that's when they cut ties. So there's this phrasing and this sentiment from people that can say, I'm not against you being Jewish. I just can't support the fact that you support Israel. Mm-hmm. And for someone who's not Jewish to tell you that you can be a Jew who's not a Zionist is really disheartening, for someone to try to define your own religion, your own identity, but also to hold that identity and then be completely shut out from someone's life without really being given the benefit of the doubt. Like, these are people that I met for 10 days, 14 days. And then after that, it was like a complete 180. Like, oh, I don't know who you are. I don't want to know who you are. So I think this idea that you come into a new environment to meet new people really got shut down. Because when someone found out that you're Jewish or someone found out that you're a Zionist, it's no longer, oh, like college is the time to learn from new perspectives, different people. If I don't have a Jewish friend, maybe now I can hear what they have to say. It's, oh, I've heard this about Jewish people. I've heard this about Zionists, and I don't want to know anymore. It was very closed off from the beginning.
It's really sad. Does anybody else have anything to add to this? I'd love to hear more about this. This is a very interesting thing to me.
Yeah, my dad and I talk about a lot of similarities that he saw in the lead up to the revolution in Iran, while the revolution was happening. And one of the main similarities that we pointed out together, and something that I teach my high school students a lot when I talk about my father's story and the Iranian Revolution and the experience of Jews in Iran, he said the protests originally started with students, intellectuals, religious leaders, which was exactly what we were seeing on college campuses post October 7th, with the encampments, with the severely radical anti-Israel and anti-Semitic protests on college campuses. He was like, it was like seeing a ghost. It felt so similar to what we experienced in Iran, the way students were being blocked access to their very own campus, which we saw at UCLA, just really eerie comparisons.
Scary. It's really scary.
I can also add, I think that the response to October 7th and the way that students on campuses responded so quickly on the anti-Israel side also proves a lot of this. I hope that we can all acknowledge that, at least in my mind, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are one and the same. The IRA definition of anti-Semitism acknowledges that as well. And I remember at Tulane, before Israel began any sort of military campaign in Gaza in response to the October 7th terror attacks, hundreds and hundreds of students on Tulane's campus gathered to celebrate the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And on that day, I was physically chased across campus by protesters screaming, "F you Jew, F you Jew." Reported it to the university, and the response was to label "fuck you Jew" as political speech and offer me 3 free sessions of mental health resources on campus, which is such a joke. But I think the fact that students on campus were protesting against Israel before Israel even responded militarily to the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust tells you everything that you need to know. And if you zoom out and look at history, in my mind, at least, anti-Semitism is such an age-old type of hatred, and it sort of morphs and changes based on, what's going on in the world at the time to sort of pin whatever the problem is on the Jew. And it was so disheartening for me to see the response happening so quickly and by students that were not at all tied to the conflict and didn't really know much about what was actually going on, but were able to come out and proudly protest against Israel. I think that Zionist has really become a sanitized word for Jew, and people are using this idea of anti-Zionism and focusing on the numbers of the casualty statistics and the numbers within this war between Israel and Hamas, but not actually focusing on the facts, not actually understanding what has been going on. You see women who've been feminists their entire lives suddenly refusing to speak out against the sexual violence that has occurred. People who claim to be human rights activists or social justice warriors on these campuses running these organizations that come out and are explicitly in support of Students for Justice in Palestine, which has become, a national malicious campaign against Jews. And I don't think it's about Israel. I genuinely don't. I think that Israel and Zionism and the current war is sort of an excuse for people's anti-Semitism to be loud and proud and on display. One story that I heard that I think really speaks to this is my friend Shabbos Kestenbaum at Harvard woke up on October 7th. He keeps Shabbat, and the sound of Students for Justice in Palestine protesting outside of the building that he lived in, celebrating the October 7th massacre on October 7th, was so loud that it woke him up. And that's how he found out about the October 7th attack and broke Shabbat for the first time in his life to call his siblings in Israel and make sure that they were alive. So I think what we're seeing now is very much vicious anti-Semitism that people are trying to disguise as anti-Zionism, and we can't let them do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chloe, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think what Yasmeen just highlighted is exactly why we're seeing Iranian American Jewish students on the front lines of the war on campus. We know firsthand from our parents' stories, our parents' lived experiences fleeing Iran, what anti-Zionism actually means. And as someone whose family fled Iran and sought refuge in Israel, the safe haven for the Jewish people, an experience, a privilege that Jews throughout history did not have, we know firsthand why it's so important to be supporting Israel as our homeland and as our safe haven around the world.
Very well said. Absolutely. I wonder, we hear quite often this sentiment that there are lots of Jews who are anti-Zionist as well, and that kind of plays off of this thing that proves that somehow they don't hate Jews because they're accepting of Jews as long as they pass this litmus test of being an anti-Zionist. Did any of you experience or see Jewish students at universities who were anti-Zionist, who were taking part in these anti-Zionist rallies and sit-ins and so on and so forth? And I'm curious if any of them were ever Middle Eastern diasporic experience or Iranian. I kind of know the answer already to that. I'm just curious if anybody experienced it. Okay, would you mind telling me a little bit about what your experiences were, if you had any, with any of these other Jewish students? And were they ever willing to listen to what your history is as Jews from the region?
Go for it. I'll let the students talk first.
I'll share one anecdote. So Tulane is, as I mentioned, one of the most Jewish schools in the country. The people who planned and led the encampment, which got a ton of press and media coverage and happened all over the country, as I think many of us know, were these anti-Zionist Jews. So you'd see these people in a kippah and then also wearing a keffiyeh at the same time, hosting religious, like Jewish religious ceremonies and gatherings that claim to be anti-Zionist within the encampment. And one day I decided to go there and walk through the encampment and try to have a conversation with these Jews. And I literally walked through this tented area, hundreds of students that had been sleeping outside, using the bathroom and tents outside, skipping classes that cost hundreds of dollars of tuition, all in support of this anti-Zionist cause. And I walked through the encampment and asked them to talk to me. I said, you can film me. I'll sit in your tent. We can do this in private. We can do this in public. We can do this however you would like. I just want to have a conversation in whatever forum you prefer to understand why you're doing this, why you're protesting in this way, especially as Jews. And not a single person was willing to talk to me, Jewish and non-Jewish. So students are willing to sleep outside, are willing to skip their classes, are willing to go on hunger strike, and yet not a single person in the encampment was willing to sit down and have a conversation with somebody that doesn't share their same viewpoints. And I think that really does speak to the broader issue. I was most bothered by the Jews that were doing this because I think to be Jewish and to be so against the only safe haven and homeland for Jews in the entire world, and not be able to even talk about or discuss or address those viewpoints with another Jew who calmly approaches you to have a nice civil conversation, really does tell you everything that you need to know. It's a lot of brainwashing. I also think that supporting the anti-Israel agenda on these college campuses has become super trendy, and the students that are doing it are very, very out of touch. So I tend to think that a lot of the Jews who are supporting that cause are Jews that have never been super connected to Israel or their Jewish identity, and are sort of seeing the images that have come out of Gaza throughout this war, and also, seeing their friends support this cause, and having a good time going out and protesting and feeling like they're really a part of this movement. And so they're joining. But, the last thing I'll say is it's a very, very fringe minority of Jews. And it's important to acknowledge the fact that I think it's like 95 or 97% of Jews support Israel's right to exist and identify as Zionists. And so we can look at that fringe minority, and it's upsetting and it's sad to see. And I wish that they weren't there, but that's not representative of the Jewish community. And most Jews do not hold those views. The fact that none of them, to my knowledge, were Middle Eastern Jews is no coincidence. I think that Middle Eastern Jews are so connected to our history, are so aware of how vital Israel is to our community and our safety. And I think it's really worth noting that we're not the people there protesting against Israel. We're the people protesting in support of Israel.
Yeah. I feel like it really speaks to a level of privilege that Iranian Jews specifically, and the broader Mizrahi and Sephardic, Middle Eastern, North African Jewish communities don't have that privilege. I think we're still, it's only the previous generation, like it's our parents that fled Iran. It's not our grandparents. It's not our yes, they fled too, but it wasn't that far back. It wasn't that long ago. So it's still fresh in our psyches. Our parents still live with the trauma of it. And I feel like that fringe minority, it really is such a privilege to be able to take an anti-Zionist stance, and it just proves how far removed you are from your own people's persecution. And it's really, the joke's on them, because it's really sad. Did any of the rest of you ever have any kind of interaction or try to have any interaction with any of these Jewish or non-Jewish students?
I just wanted to echo what you mentioned, this idea of having the privilege of not remembering that Jewish people aren't always safe in the country that they live in. I feel like we're really experiencing the echo of what our parents and grandparents lived and tell us about, whether we're talking about it in passing or they're really just sitting down and letting us know. So I remember we spoke at a student government meeting on the 4th floor of a ginormous building on campus. And it was specifically to address the fact that our student government broke its own bylaws to publish an anti-Israel and pro-BDS act, and they endorsed it by the student government and said that this represents the entire opinion of students on campus, when we know clearly it was not, because you had to break the rules to get it published. And when we were there to speak, it started exactly how it always does. I'm not against Jewish people. I'm against Israel. I'm against people who support Israel, who are Zionists. And even just to talk about what Yasmeen mentioned, if she was being chased across campus from an anti-Israel protest, but she's being yelled at and being called a Jew, if you're using the same word synonymously, then that means you hate Jewish people. You can't just say you hate people who are pro-Israel. And I talked about this a lot after that meeting with a lot of other people, which is really the impetus for why we decided to get a lot more loud and active and have a more prolific pro-Israel life on campus, is because it started as something that's, I'm anti-Zionist, but every excuse that they gave was a different form of anti-Semitism. They said that we're controlling the media, and that's why we're upset that they published this. They were saying insane, these are not new pieces of anti-Semitism, but but they're rebranding it as anti-Zionism. And when you take away this idea that, oh, this is political speech, this is what I'm thinking, if you're going to try and rephrase it and recase it so that there's no repercussions, not only are you destroying and dismantling a community, you're polarizing and isolating yourself even more from other people. And when you live with such deep hate, you can see it so well on campus. When you talk to Jewish students who are anti-Israel, they have no connection to the Jewish community on campus. They've become so ostracized from it, because to be a really active member in Jewish community also means being active in the pro-Israel community on campus. It's one and the same. So you have someone who's yelling at us very anti-Semitic, rhetoric, propaganda, really just being so anti-Jewish. And you have an anti-Zionist Jew right there who's like, oh, but that doesn't apply to me because I passed that test. They know that I'm not. You're talking about Jewish people. They didn't ask if you were pro or anti-Israel. You're talking about a Jewish person and being anti-Semitic, and you're going to try and pass on and say, no, we know one Jewish person who's anti-Israel. You said all these things. I don't know how they're standing next to you with a straight face.
So disheartening.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
I want to piggyback off of a little bit about what Brooke just mentioned, this idea of like community. A lot of what we refer to them as a Jews that kind of abandoned their Zionist identity really are deep down searching for community. And oftentimes it's these anti-Zionist and anti-Israel communities that are willing to take them in and give them a home and make them feel like they're a part of something. The search for community is a very basic human desire, and it's something that we all seek as humans. And I tend to notice that a lot of anti-Israel Jews also happen to be queer. And I think there's something to say about that. And there's something that we should look inward as a Jewish community. Are we doing our best to welcome all Jews, to welcome queer Jews? Because oftentimes queer Jews don't have a good experience with Jewish communities. So they look elsewhere. They look elsewhere for community, and they'll typically be taken in by, kind of these social justice groups that usually adopt really anti-Israel positions. And if you're saying that, the one thing I need to abandon of my identity is Zionism, is being pro-Jewish, then I'm willing to do that for the sake of community. It's really disheartening, and I think we have to be very conscious, all of us, with the Jewish communities that we create, that we are inclusive and accepting and loving of all Jews, however they show up and wherever, and meet them where they're at. A lot of it is something that we can do better as well, kind of looking inward, because we can kind of be cliquey. We can tend to push other Jews away that aren't, Jewish in the way that we want them to be Jewish. That's an experience that I had growing up a part of the Jewish community. And I think that it's really important that we have that representation. And Matthew, that's something that I admire about you so much. You were one of the queer Jews that I've ever seen, let alone queer Persian Jews. And finding you and finding your page and your account for the first time, quite literally, like, you don't understand how seen I felt. And I think that it's something that we can improve on, and I think we are improving on it, and we're being better about it. But it's really kind of comes down to this basic desire of community and wanting to see people that look like you and wanting to fit in.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you for sharing that so honestly. I can speak to this a little bit just because I am part of the LGBT community. I'm Iranian and I'm Jewish, and I'm very much a Zionist. But I think you hit the nail on the head. I think you're absolutely correct. And I do think that that's a big component of it. I think, even broadly speaking, a lot of Jews, young Jewish people who have abandoned Zionism, and particularly the ones who are LGBTQ+, I really believe that there's a subconscious feeling of rejection that they had from within the community. And I experienced that personally. I mean, when I didn't really know what Zionism was when I was, college aged and in high school. And I did experience a little bit of that. And I did experience wanting to pull away from the Jewish community and the Iranian community and the Iranian Jewish community. Like, I didn't want anything to do with it because I did view it as a source of my pain. So I think that that's you hit the nail on the head. That's something that we definitely need to improve on and work on. Because I'm one of the lucky ones. I count myself as a lucky one because I came back around and said, I'm here whether you like it or not, and this is part of me as much as it is anyone. So thank you for sharing that, Abby.
I think you'd be surprised that how many Jews can resonate with that and relate to that. I had a similar experience where I thought I'm gonna take a step back. All my life has been surrounded by being Jewish and being Persian, and thank God I live in LA, and there's such a great, amazing Persian and Jewish community. But you really do you feel hurt and you feel wronged, by that community in a lot of ways. And similarly to you, we both had that experience of circling back and saying, hey, no, I can find the Jewish community that I love and that I feel comfortable and represented. And Stand With Us was a huge part of that journey for me. And I think a lot more people than we realize, a lot more Jews than we realize can relate to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are a lot of, or not a handful of, LGBTQ plus Jewish young people who do reach out to me all the time, and they feel very isolated. So yeah, I want to shift gears just slightly-ish. I'm curious to know, when the war broke out between Israel and the Islamic Republic, what were you guys thinking? How did it make you feel? And what were your family's reactions? Brandon, we haven't heard from you in a hot minute. Want to jump in?
Yeah. I think it was definitely a whirlwind of emotions. I think people, especially in my family and across the Iranian Jewish community, were kind of on the edge of their seat, asking whether this is the moment where finally the world is going to see the Islamic regime for what it is. And is this finally the moment where it's going to fall and we can go back and reconnect with our roots there? I think there are a lot of foreign policy issues involved in the choices that are made in the Middle East and continue to be made in the Middle East. But I sat back as an Iranian Jew whose parents were basically at the mercy of this regime who has taken over, and thought to myself, like, the average American doesn't really understand what's happening over there. The average American only sees the potential for war, but doesn't really see what a world without the Islamic Republic means for the safety of our troops in the Middle East, for Jews living in the Middle East, for Americans, American citizens stationed around the Middle East. So there is a really intimate connection that we as Iranian Jews have with the events of the last couple of weeks, and we were on the edge of our seats. But stepping back, that intimacy isn't really well known with the average American.
Yeah, that's a big part of why we're doing this today. So thank you. Does anybody else have any thoughts or feelings on the war that broke out, that 2-week period of time?
Yeah, I'd love to add. I remember it was a Thursday night, and I was writing a speech because I was giving a speech on Saturday during a Persian Jewish young professional Shabbat service. Like, what am I going to talk about? I'm writing it, and then the news starts breaking out. I'm like, okay, I have a lot I'm going to talk about now. This is making it easier, but also much harder. And I found myself really just being in community. The next day, on Friday, everywhere I went, it's what they were talking about. And I was lucky. I was really lucky. I was at the nail salon and everyone was talking about it. I was at Equinox and everyone was talking about it. I was in these safe spaces where I felt like I could contribute to these conversations, and I was not in a bomb shelter. I didn't have to run for my life. I didn't have to feel like I wasn't safe. And I it was a very emotional 2-week process. I had the emotions of feeling hope for the first time since the Women Life Freedom Movement, that we're finally going to have an Iran free from the terrorist occupiers, that I'm finally going to be able to go to the land that my parents grew up with my parents, with my family. I felt a lot of hope and a lot of sadness for the innocent people who were attacked during this time, for the casualties on both sides. And it was a really, really challenging time. And I didn't even know that I had a family member who was visiting Iran during that time,
Oh,
who was
wow.
arrested, who was still in jail for being Jewish, basically. And I didn't even know that during that time, because my family knows I'm a very emotional person, and I would have really carried those
Wait,
emotions with me. So I didn't know that. He's still there. We're working with the government, but this is a really deeply personal war for all of us, because it's the places that, I think Rabbi Tarlin said this, that it's two of our homelands. It's Israel, our homeland that many of us, that all of us have visited and have had such pivotal moments in our lives in. It's where we face when we pray. It's all that we talk about. And then it's the home that our parents and our ancestors have lived in for 2,500 years. It's where one of the 3 languages a lot of us speak comes from. It's our culture. It's 2 places we feel very connected with. One we haven't been before, one we have been many times, but 2 parts of a really important part of our identity as Iranian American Jews.
wow. Yeah, I always call Iran the homeland and Israel the motherland. If you can, I don't know how much you can discuss this, but can you tell us a little bit more about your relative that was visiting Iran and is now under arrest there?
Honestly, I've been scared to talk about it because I don't know what I can and should share. That's why
So
I've
let
refrained from putting it on social
Yeah.
media. I
So
didn't say
let's
any
not talk
names,
about. I
so
don't think we should talk about it for that reason, but I think
yeah.
that maybe we can talk about what it's like for Jews in Iran right now, for that 10% that remains. And do you guys know? Like, does anyone want to explain that? Yasmeen?
Yeah, so I'm here in Israel, and my mom grew up here. She moved to the U.S. when she was 17, and her parents grew up in Iran. And my dad fled Iran during the revolution. He was a young boy. I was at my mom's family's house last week for Shabbat, and I brought my roommate here. She's not Persian, and she asked me to ask my family in Hebrew, like, how does it feel to be Iranian and Jewish at this time? And do you guys know anyone still in Iran? And I had no idea that I still have family members in Iran. My great aunt, my grandma's sister, told me that she has a cousin in Iran, and like their entire family lives there, that cousin and her husband and their children, and that they've been having Jewish weddings in secret, that they've been fully practicing Judaism in secret, that they actually have a Torah, a small Torah, that they hide, that they light Hanukkah candles in their closet and let them burn in the dark in their closet. And obviously my family has been very concerned about them. She told me that she's been, throughout the entire duration of the war, was picking up the phone every morning and calling and calling and calling. And a few days ago, they finally answered and said, "Stop calling me from an Israeli number. Are you trying to get me killed?" And hung up. And they have no idea when they're going to hear from that family member again. Obviously, I don't know that person. I don't know that cousin. So I don't have any sort of personal relationship. But it was crazy to me to think that someone pretty closely related to me is there, and is secretly practicing their Judaism, trying to hold on to that identity. And it's very scary to think that anything could happen to them at any moment. To me, I think a lot of the people who do support Israel's war against Iran feel like now that the war is quote unquote over, that, you know, things are going to get better. But the reality is that there are still Jews there, and those Jews are being slaughtered every day by this evil regime, the regime that drove all of our families out of there. And I really hope that we can actually get to the finish line and Iran will actually be free from this regime. I'm so glad that their nuclear capabilities have been dismantled. And I think that that's the most important thing. But I also yearn and pray for a time when, you know, the regime is completely dismantled to a point where we can go back with our families, with our parents, like Chloe was saying. I remember on Father's Day, which was, you know, sort of the pit of the war that was going on, I asked my dad and grandfather what they wanted for Father's Day, like what their wish was this year for Father's Day. And they both looked at me and started to cry at the same time and said, "We want to take you back home and show you where we grew up." And that made me really emotional. I hope we can get to a place where the people of Iran, not just the Jews, but the women and the scholars and the students and, the people living there will finally be free from the suffocating regime that has tortured and ruined their lives. And hopefully we can all go back together and see where our families grew up.
With God's wish. I want to ask, we got to end in a few minutes. I do want to ask this question. Have any of you found any other minority groups or ethnic groups who you are friends with or who you have built an allyship with on college campuses? We know outside of college there are certain, for example, a lot of Hindus, a lot of Iranians actually who are non-Jewish. There's a lot of different groups of people who are, for lack of a better term, on our side. Did you experience any of that in your campuses? No. That's really sad.
No, I have. I have.
Thank you.
And I want to bring it back to, the start of this conversation about what we have seen, how the campus environment has changed since October 7th. On one hand, yes, we've seen, anti-Israel and anti-Zionist voices become a little bit more emboldened and proud in the way that they ostracize Jewish students. But we've also seen so many new blossoming friendships, so much innovation in the way both Jewish advocates and advocates beyond the Jewish community are supporting the state of Israel and supporting the civil rights of Jewish students on college campuses. I'll just give you one story. For 2.5 years in my time as a senator, I've been working on, transformational legislation for the Jewish community. This idea predated October 7th, but it was complicated by October 7th. And it essentially established a permanent seat in our student government for Jewish students, one that Jewish students would select every year. And it's something that's afforded to every other minority group except for Jewish students. Wow. And so for the last 2.5 years, I've been working on this project, and God sent one of the most incredible people to support me in this initiative. And he was a Black man from the Central Valley of California who didn't really have any strong connection or feeling to Israel, but just saw what was happening to Jewish students on campus and was just shocked and was woken up. And so he brought so much passion and fervor to this fight. And I had, an Asian member of from Huntington Beach, California. So two like distinct parts of the state and two minority groups, and they were the ones that got me at where I was kind of in the pit of despair, not knowing where the path forward was. But these two were the ones that got it across the finish line. And so we got a unanimous vote on that legislation. And to be honest with you, it has set USC apart from every other campus that's feeling the hammer of the federal administration right now. USC has set itself apart in this way because the culture on our campus is so they care so deeply about the people that they connect to, and I think that's also a lesson for all of us, for advocates for Israel within the Jewish community and beyond the Jewish community, that coalition building always starts from relationships. It starts from helping someone on an exam or helping someone with something that they care about. And then when they feel so invested in your future, feel so invested in what you care so deeply about, they are going to be there shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm with you. And I saw that in real time. And I'm just so excited that like a legacy that I can leave as I graduate and matriculate on can be this legislation that I could not have done, that I could not have gotten across the finish line without other strong advocates from minority groups.
That's incredible, Brandon. That's truly incredible. I love to hear it. Does anybody else have any other stories with allyship with people outside of the Jewish community at all, or anything at all?
I have a story. So when I did the Stand With Us Emerson Fellowship 6 years ago, I did it alongside our Christian Outreach Fellowship. And while they weren't at UCLA, those allies, those friends, those true friends to me in the community were the people checking up on me. They are my colleagues now. I just came back from a field professionals retreat with different professionals who are working with college students. And there were so many of our friends from CUFI, from Passages, from the Philos Project, these communities that care so much about us, that care for Israel and the Jewish people who show up. I also had the privilege of attending the Hindu Yuva Conference, which is a conference for Hindu college students. And my colleague and I were the two non-Hindu people in the room. And the amount of students that came up to us from across the US and Canada that kept telling us how ways they've stood up for the Jewish community on campus, how they come to Hillel for Shabbat dinner, how they've offered their support, really has given me so much hope. And I hope that we as Jews continue to stand up for our friends, to support those relationships, because our allyships should never be something that's transactional. It should be genuine, come from a place of love and support for each other.
Very well said. Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting that communities that have been affected by Islamist extremism get it. And the Hindu community is definitely one of those communities. So if anybody has anything else that they want to add, now would be the time.
I just wanted to say I'm so inspired by this panel and by these incredible Iranian Jewish, Persian Jewish activists and all the ones we've been seeing stand up. And we are truly making our ancestors proud.
Amen. I will second that. And as somebody that's a bit older than you guys, I'm very proud of all of you as well. And I'm honored to have been able to moderate this discussion with all 5 of you. And I'm so happy that you joined. And I know what it's like to feel like you're working so hard towards something and you're not feeling or seeing the results of it, but just know I'm feeling and seeing it. And thank you for everything that you're doing. Universities, I think Jewish university students are at the front line of this fight. There's the war that's on the ground, and then there's the ideological war, and you guys really are bearing the brunt of it, because it's not just coming from students. The students are getting their directives, as we discussed earlier, from professors, and that's really, really difficult and challenging. So thank you. Thank you for sticking to your guns and for being proud of who you are and being unapologetically Iranian and Jewish. And big love to all of you. And to those of you who are watching, thank you. Join us again sometime, and make sure that you subscribe to JIMENA's newsletter at jimena.org. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.